Okay, well, welcome to Financial Aid Navigation. Today, we're really excited to talk to you about the changes to the financial aid applications and just financial aid in general. My name is Christina Winstead. I work with the Washington Student Achievement Council. I use she, her pronouns, and I love talking about financial aid. So those of you who have worked with me before know how excited I get about this season. It's my favorite time of the year. And so I'm excited to talk about the updates and different ways we can help support you. In the chat right now, we have a virtual key to your success. This is a digital resource. We'll have links to all the things we're going to talk about in this presentation today. And you can also order physical copies of that resource as well. So before we get started, I want to introduce myself and our team. So as I said before, my name is Christina Winstead. I work with the Washington Student Achievement Council. I'm joined from the Washington Student Achievement Council by Sam Washington. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Washington. I'm a program associate. This is my cat, Sally. A little attention starved this morning. But I work with the college-bound side of the house as well as the 12th year campaign side of the house.
I'm not kidding. Our pets are very important parts of our team. I mean, we would not get it done without Sully. I've got a basset hound under my feet. I hope that you also have animal companions that help you in the world of college access. We also have a brand new team member joining us from WSAC. Kathy, if you want to say hi.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kathy, and I'm so happy to be here. Great to see you all.
We're so excited to have Kathy join us for our college-bound team, and she just started last week. And then, of course, from PSCCN, Dinda, do you want to introduce yourself and your team?
Hi, my name is Dinda Davis. I'm the program coordinator for PSCCN, and I support our program with financial aid efforts. And I'm also joined by Mercy Daramola.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mercy Daramola, she, her, hers, Director of Postsecondary, the Peterson College and Career Network. Great to be here today, and I'm excited to chat with you all today about financial aid. We do want to name that our colleague Christian Gramlin isn't here today, but he is a big part of putting together this presentation as well.
So, and then in a second, we're going to get to know who everybody in the room is too. First, I want to talk about, we've done these presentations before with Aim Higher, but who Aim Higher is. And so we've had people ask, like, is Aim Higher, is this what is this, a new organization, is it a new agency? And it's actually an initiative, and it's really hosted by several different organizations, and really it's everybody. It's everyone's work towards financial aid completion. It's addressing issues in financial aid completion in Washington State. And despite the fact that we have one of the most amazing financial aid packages in the nation, we have one of the lowest completion rates in the nation. And so it consists of community technical colleges, partners like you at the K-12 level, as well as our community-based organizations, Washington Student Achievement Council, the Independent Colleges of Washington, and the Council of Presidents. We're all working together to provide trainings to help people be informed about financial aid and have access to resources. We're also working to make sure that there's conversations about financial aid and supporting students in this important process. What I like is we're doing this all through our different agencies' lens of equity. So we're trying to make sure that the information about financial aid, this important message about financial aid, is getting to all students. So like for 12th year campaign, our goal is to serve all 12th graders and make sure they know about financial aid and how to access financial aid. To me, that's critical. So when I say all 12th graders, I mean every single one. I mean our students, not who are just in the high schools, but our incarcerated youth as well. Our youth who are not in the buildings right now, who aren't able to show up to school, making sure that all students have access to that information so they can make an informed decision for themselves on whether they want to apply for aid or not. This initiative really is to support also the Washington College Grant, which is this amazing funding source for students that's new, that's just out there recently. So students may think they might not be eligible for aid, but the qualifications of aid have changed so much in the last couple of years that there are students out there who may think, I'm not going to get aid, and they won't apply. And I say that because I was one of those students. When I was in high school, I went to my financial aid night, and when I got there, and I went there because there was pizza. There was promises of pizza. So schools out there who are like, I don't know if our pizza works. It works. And so there were promises of pizza. I showed up, and a friend of a friend's mom said, what are you doing here? Your family's rich. You're not going to get financial aid. You don't need to apply. And that's the first time anyone had called our family rich. So I was really excited. I'm like, I'm getting pizza and today I found out we're rich. This is great. So I went and got some paper towels and wrapped up some slices of pizza and took them home. Spoilers, the fact that I was like pocketing pizza probably was an indicator that I should think more about applying for aid. It was definitely one of those things that like someone shouldn't have told me, oh, no, you guys make too much. And because I listened to somebody else and not applied for aid, when it came time to apply for college, I ended up applying for 3 jobs to work to pay for my tuition. So I worked at the Swiss Pretzel, the twist you can't resist, but you all could, because it went out of business like while I was standing there. I was a sandwich artist. Shout out to all my Subway people. And then I also I worked at Payless doing BOGO action. And so I failed my first quarter of school because I was working 3 jobs. I was working like 2 basically full-time job equivalents. And for me, what ended up happening was I went to go drop out of school and someone said, did you apply for financial aid? And I was like, I don't know if you know this, we're rich, we won't qualify. And they said, go talk to a financial aid officer. And 30 minutes of a financial aid officer's life, their investment in me to come sit down at a computer and show me how to do this is literally what changed the trajectory of my life. I was ready to drop out of school. So the importance of making sure students have access to the information, it really makes the difference between them making a decision on whether we're going to go to college or not. And now I get to do what I love every single day and I get paid a livable wage. And that's what I want for our students. So I want to make sure that as we talk about aid, students may not know what's out there for them and that they need to be informed consumers of their aid using the tools that we have to provide to them, financial aid calculators, and not information from a friend of a friend's mom who's going to tell them they may or may not qualify. The only person who will tell a student that they're going to qualify is the financial aid departments they're applying towards. And so we encourage students to apply, and this training here will help students have the information they need really to support the application process and beyond. And then our partners from PSCCN, I want to make sure you guys talk about your amazing work.
Awesome. So the Puget Sound College and Career Network, we're housed at the Puget Sound Educational Service District, supporting King, Pierce, and a little bit of Kitsap counties all around post-secondary access, readiness, and success around the region. And we're excited to partner with being here today to really talk about not just financial aid, but financial aid in the context of supporting students as they go through and to post-secondary and complete it successfully. Our team does a lot of work around providing professional learning and resources similar to this. So different trainings throughout the year for practitioners and leaders as you're working with students and young people. We also provide coaching and technical assistance work. So some of your districts or organizations or colleges may have partnered with PSCCN in the past to provide different things that bring together a district, a college, a CBO to think about how can we better our systems and our strategies to support our students and young people as they go through post-secondary journeys. We also have done a lot of work around the region to figure out what are some of the right ways we can work together. You may have heard of King County Promise. That really is the last few bullet points of this overview, where we think about how can we at the system level come together to coordinate and really focus on partnerships that remove barriers for students that are systemic. As we're thinking about financial aid today, PSCCN's context is not just how do we get our students to fill out the first financial application, but how do we make sure that they are the barriers that may be in front of them that are around or including finances as they go through post-secondary are removed. I'll follow Christina's lead thinking about my experience with financial aid in college. I remember just being really intimidated year after year as I would go and think about what does this mean that I have a ton of loans? Mercy now knows what Mercy then should have asked a little bit more questions around not just signing the promissory notes, but really thinking about how do I access the resources that allow me to be able to be in school and really be focused in school. And so our hope with this training is to put it in context to support you as folks that are supporting young people, but also think about what do we do around the region to make sure that other barriers are mitigated or removed for students and young people. We focus primarily on supporting students of color, students from first generation families, and students who are low income as well, from low income backgrounds as well. And so we're excited to have this training today be a part of the work that we do.
Thank you so much, and we're excited to partner with you. I love being able to partner with PSCCN. This is something we've done for, gosh, about 5 years now since I started with the agency, and it's just, I love it. So we want to know who's in the room, who's here with us. If you could do me a favor and in the chat, if you could enter your name, your position, and who you work for. And that way we can get a sense of who's joining us today. Oh, welcome, welcome. Oh, look at this variety. Oh, welcome. So we've got a variety of colleges and CBOs. We have high schools, a little bit of everybody. This is amazing. What I love about this when we do these trainings is sometimes, especially I feel like with COVID, is it's felt like sometimes when we do this work, we're doing it alone because we don't get to go out and see everybody as much as we used to. And seeing everybody who's here today, it just is amazing to see all the people who are working towards supporting students in this process and just in college access. It just warms my heart, and I'm so excited to be able to work with you. I see some names on here too. I'm like, I'll see you later this week. I'm so excited to have you all here as we start to work towards the beginning of our financial aid season. And you may also notice as you go through the chat, people that are partners of yours as well that you want to say hi to. So in the same chat box, if you want to go ahead and you can put, and if you feel comfortable answering this, you can, and if not, it's okay too. On a scale of 1 to 5, basically a 1 being like, oh, financial aid, hardest of passes, and like a 5 being like, Christina, make me the presenter. Where are we at for financial aid comfort level today? A good range as well. I see some 6s. Yes, I know. There are some people that, yes, I feel I could pass off the baton to. So we're hoping is today, for those of you who have a lot of information about financial aid, is to give you some updates about changes to the 22-23 application. And those of you who are new to financial aid, you're going to get a little bit of everything today. And when you leave here, if you're like, I still have questions on a couple other things, we have other trainings and other opportunities to make sure you're supported in this work. The most important thing to remember is you're not doing this alone. There's a lot of people doing the same thing, and we're all working together. The resources that we have, like, we want to make sure, feel free to take those resources, put your logo on them, use the resources that we have, but we're all working together to do this. So today we're going to talk about why financial aid is so important. We're going to do a FAFSA line by line for the 22-23 application. We have a WASFA line by line as well. We're going to talk about myths and challenges and common errors, how to support student applicants, then resources and next steps, and of course, questions. So if you have any questions, you feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to try to answer them at the end, but there may be some that we answer as we go along. For me, I always say put questions in the chat because when you have them, because sometimes all at the end are like, I had a question, but I forgot it. And so if you have that happen to you, don't worry. We have plenty of time for you to get answers. So why is this so important? Not just because I love it so much. I know that not everyone loves financial aid as much as I do, but it's so important because our financial aid completion rate in Washington State is really low. So we have students who are eligible for gift aid in this state who are not utilizing those opportunities. And we have students who are eligible for funds we know that are not using this. And that's why it makes me sad because I think about like students maybe in the same boat I was where they're not informed about that they have these opportunities available to them. So less than half of our students, our seniors last year, completed a financial aid application successfully. And of those that did complete, we had 1,500 complete with errors so great that they are unable to process their application. And so to me, I know that we have more students that need aid and that want aid that are out there. And the other part is that we're 49th, it says 48th, but we're 49th actually in the nation for financial aid completion. And so we actually have one of the lowest completion rates in the nation, even though we have one of the best completion packages, like we have one of the best financial aid packages for students. Yes, I do see a question. We will have a copy of this recording for those who couldn't make it today, or if you have to go run because you have an emergency, no worries. Yeah, go take care of that. We will have a recording for you. And so the thing is that our financial aid completion rates are not matching what our students' aspirations are, that the students expect and want post-secondary training. And so the rate of students who are applying does not match what their expectations are. So we know that there's a gap. So for financial aid, before we jump into the FAFSA and the WASFA and kind of the nitty-gritty stuff, I just want to say that when we're talking about financial aid, we're going to be talking about requirements to get into programs, income levels, and when we're working with students, this can be really uncomfortable conversations. And so we want to preface this with, there are some families that this is going to require some trust being built before they're going to feel comfortable answering these questions. Also, they may not know these questions are coming, and so a parent who doesn't know that they're going to be asked questions about their income and other marital status and things, sometimes that can be really hard for them. So while we go through the line by line, I just want to make sure that we're very mindful about the student and family experience of filling out this form for the first time ever. So I wanted to start with our changes. So we do have some small changes to the 22-23 application. These aren't the big changes that are coming down the road. Some people have messaged already about FAFSA simplification. We got a couple years for that, don't worry. There were just some minor changes. The first change, basically, like, students can come into the application in a variety of roles, and it's a little bit easier than it was before. For the data retrieval tool, they are going to look at virtual currency. One of my favorite things, this is like one of the best ones that happened all year. Drug convictions are no longer in effect as students' aid eligibility. So when they fill out the form, if they say they've had a drug conviction that occurred while they're receiving federal financial aid, if they say yes, they're going to get a worksheet, but it's not going to keep them from getting aid. This was a huge issue because a lot of people thought that if you had a felony, no matter what it was for, that you could not receive financial aid, and that is not the case. So I'm really excited to see this because there are students out there that this is going to change that misconception. We talk about myths about aid. That is one of the myths that is out there. The registration status with selective service, this is another big one. This is no longer going to affect a student's eligibility to receive federal financial aid. So previous to this, students who did not register for selective service, male students who did not register for selective service, they ended up, if they came back to school as an adult later on, like I had a student, he was in his late 30s, he wanted federal financial aid, he never signed up for selective service, and he was unable to get federal financial aid, and it broke my heart to see this person who really wanted their education, who was so excited about it, have that barrier. So this is no longer going to impact them. It makes me so excited to know that that's not going to impact our students. They're still going to be asked questions about selective service, but it's not tied to their federal financial aid anymore. So that's a really good and new change. So here's the application itself. And we're going to kind of go through these. And for that worksheet for drug convictions, I'm not sure if it goes to the college or to federal student aid. I think federal student aid is the one that has to disperse it because it's an eligibility component. Okay, so there are 3 ways to apply for the FAFSA. So for the FAFSA, students can apply on the website, on the phone app, or the paper app. I want to make sure people know that the quickest ways to apply and to have your application processed are going to be the website and the phone app. If you are working on the application and the application is, if it's struggling to come up, if it's saying you have encountered an error on FAFSA on the web or any of those combination of words, I encourage you to change your browser first. That is going to be the first thing they ask you to do, is to change your browser. The next thing that they'll ask you to do is to switch over to the phone app. So when you call in to federal student aid, so if you're having problems accessing the application, the first thing to do is change the browser that you're on. The second thing to do is to see if you can complete the application on your phone or have families do that. The other piece is that the chat feature, the live chat, is usually open pretty late because it's open to East Coast time until I think like 11, so 8 o'clock our time. So it's open during most of the financial aid evening events. And I encourage you to have families use the chat feature for financial aid assistance as well. For paper applications, this is a great option for, I use it a lot for youth and adults who are incarcerated who do not have access to the internet. The website's offered for the FAFSA in 2 languages. It's in English and Spanish. And then the first step, of course, is their FSA IDs. The FSA ID is just them creating an account. This is an account that they're going to use to apply for financial aid and to manage their loans. So when they create their FSA ID, they want to make sure they're using an email address that's not their high school email address. They want to have a professional email address that won't make an admissions officer blush, that they'll check on a frequent basis. And so it's a great time for them to create one of those if they don't have one. I say that because my old boss, when I worked in admissions, would slide me applications and say, read this email address out loud. And there were literally email addresses I couldn't read out loud without losing my job. And so I tell students, don't be that person. Make sure you have a good one that you'll check so that you can have access to it after you graduate. And there's resources to help students complete their FSA IDs in addition to federal student aid resources. So here's the FAFSA login page, and on the FAFSA this year, you'll notice something different, and that is Aiden is there on the landing page when they're signing in. So Aiden is their chatbot that helps with questions about financial aid. So they can use little Aiden by clicking on the owl right there. Then we have tell us about yourself if you're a student, a parent, or a preparer. A preparer is the person who's paid to help students complete their application. This is a really important piece when we talk about common definitions with students. When students read through these things, even though it says, I'm a student, I want to access the form, I'm a preparer. Students in the past have picked preparer because they're like, I prepared this form, so I'm a preparer. So it's about those common definitions for students. Preparer is someone who gets paid to do this. So they'll select their role, and then they'll go ahead and sign in. And so they'll log in. If they haven't created an FSA ID, this is where they're going to be prompted to do it. And then it'll take them right to the login page. They'll have a section that they'll have to read before continuing. And then here's where they're going to select the 22-23 application for federal financial aid. So for the FAFSA, they have 2-year applications. This is the same for FAFSA and WASFA. So the applications for the FAFSA and the WASFA are the same questions because they're both applications for aid. It's just the format's a little different. So they're both going to have the same application years. So we have the year that our seniors, our class of 2022 is going to be going to college, and that's the 22-23 application. If you're working with students who are like, I need to apply for financial aid for this current school year, they're going to complete the 21-22 application, and they're going to renew the 22-23 application. So if you're working with students who want to start college within this current school year, they want to do both applications. Seniors will just do the 22-23. Now, if the senior does the 21-22, no worries. They can go back in and do a renewal and do the 22-23. And then you just tell a student they've learned how to do an initial application and a renewal, which is something that they'd have to learn in college anyway, because they're going to apply every year they go to college. They're going to create a save key. This is a key, like typically like 4 digits that they will remember by the time they are done completing the application. It's also what their parent will need to complete their portion of the application. 45-day rule. So the 45-day rule is that if a student logs into an application and starts it but does not touch it for 45 days, the information in the application will be deleted. We want to make sure students, when they start a FAFSA, that they're moving forward in the application process and that they're not leaving their application unattended for 45 days. This is a big one for if you're doing like financial aid events right now. Like you want to make sure that you're checking with your students like every couple weeks so that you don't get to that 45-day period. Here's the new introduction page. So they've reformatted the FAFSA from last year, so it looks a little more sleek, a little more spelt. Then they're going to ask about personal information about the student. So this is about the student themselves, and so the student's the one filling out the application, not the parent. So this year I've noticed we've had several parents who have tried to get ahead of the game and they filled out their student's application for financial aid, but what they ended up doing was applying themselves for financial aid, not their student. So when it says student, that means the person who is applying for financial aid for the following year. The information that's listed in here will be imported from their FSA ID. They're going to go ahead and put their email address that is not their high school email address, that's not going to make an admissions officer blush. And they'll make sure and verify that their mailing address is correct. They're going to verify how long they've lived in Washington State. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to live in Washington State for 5 years to be a resident. In Washington State, it's 1 year. You survive one rainy/fire season with us, and you are one of us. So get your jacket with a hood. We're excited to have you. You are usually a resident at one year. So they do ask for 5 years. That's for other program requirements. It's also going to ask for citizenship status, and this is for eligibility for the application. Parent citizenship status is not a eligibility requirement for financial aid. So I hear this from students that are concerned that because they have mixed status families, their parents are not U.S. citizens, that they won't get aid. That's not the case. The other rumor I started hearing about 2 years ago is that students, I've had students tell me that their gender designation that impacts their aid, and that is definitely not the case. And so I think what that stems from is that in the application, there is no non-binary gender designation, even though in Washington State, we have birth certificates and licenses that reflect a non-binary gender designation. And so that is something that we're hoping will be clarified in the FAFSA simplification, that you'll be able to select the non-binary in addition. And I think removing the selective service component from aid is a big step towards that. Okay, so next is going to talk about students' education level. So what are they going to be going towards? Will they be going to college for the first time? It's important for especially for students who have done some dual credit programs, that they're selecting that it's their first bachelor's degree. I say this because, again, common definitions. I've had students say, well, I'm graduating, therefore I am a graduate student. That totally makes sense, but they're getting their first bachelor's because they're graduating from high school. And then it's going to ask them if they want to be considered for work study. And this is a big one. The big one is that some schools, if they say no or I don't know to work study, that the school will not consider them for work study. If they say yes to work study, they can always decline it. But if they say no or I don't know, not every school is going to be able to provide that to them. It is income based. And so I encourage you, you want to make sure that just students say yes, so they have more options. The two words together sound like a real bummer. Work and study, they're like hardest of passes, but really it's an opportunity to work on campus while going to school. Here's the selective service question. It's not going to impact their eligibility, but they're still going to ask it, and they will still register the student for selective service if they indicate that they want that done. And then yes, for the 45-day rule, if it has to be the applications that are not submitted. So if they've submitted their application, they're good. But if they've just started an application, they've got everything, but I'm waiting for my parent's signature, and then they wait 45 days, they'll delete out everything if it's unsubmitted. Next, it's going to ask about parent education levels, and if the student's been in foster care, this is going to typically trigger trio services and other support services for a student. This is where the student's going to go ahead and add their high school. So they're going to verify the high school name by putting in the school, the name, and the city and state, and then they'll be able to verify the school name. And then they'll pick their colleges. So if a student is not sure about where they want to go, so I've had students say, well, I'm not sure, so I'm not going to apply for financial aid. You get 10 spots. You can put 10 colleges on here. So the world is your oyster. Put as many schools down as you're interested in. If they have more than 10 schools, this is time for them to start narrowing it down. I say this because they can't attend 10 schools. It's not like they have time turners or DeLoreans out there. They're going to have to pick one to go to. So it's time to kind of start narrowing those down. So I tell students, if they have a top 20, then I want them to pick a top 10 and do that as your first initial application submissions. And if you still want any of those other schools, then they can go ahead and log back in. After they've submitted and they've transmitted the applications, they can log back in and add other schools and delete the ones off that maybe they're less interested in now. They're going to go ahead and list their housing plans. So on here, their housing plan
your
options.
Slides aren't advancing. They're still on selected service.
Oh, I apologize. Is anyone else? Let me hold on one second. Sam, can you verify, what are you seeing real quick?
I'm still seeing the selective service screen as well. Maybe if
Okay,
you
cool.
unshare and reshare it, it'll
Yeah.
refresh it.
Give me 1 second. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, give me 1 second.
So much for technology cooperating today.
You know. Okay, I'm just resetting it to see if it'll. Sam, I'm not sure. I'm having problems resharing it.
Let's see if I can share and then I'll flip through the slides for you. Just gotta make sure I get to the right slide though.
Thank you for your patience, everyone. And I'm on slide 31.
Okay. How's that?
I think it might be a glitch on my side, Sam. I am so sorry.
Okay, no problem. I am happy to pick up.
Pick up for a second. I'll be right back in.
All right. Okay, so I believe Christina was on the selective service question. As she stated before, they had a student in the past not be able to receive financial aid because this was something that they hadn't done in the past. So it's important that right now we get that question answered, but when simplification comes through, that will be one of the questions that isn't going to be such a huge determining factor anymore for students. I believe she mentioned this as well. Students want to be able to put in any information, whether or not they were engaged with the foster care program here in Washington State. This will trigger additional services that they may be eligible for as they're receiving financial aid. It's important that when students do get the opportunity to provide this kind of information, to provide it as early as they possibly can. It spares them of other paper heavy procedures that they need to provide this information should they not get the opportunity to do it here. So it just really does make the process for students a lot smoother. They're going to put in the high school information. They're going to need to select the high school that they're currently attending. They will need to submit their transcripts as well at some point, but this is how they verify against that information. And then they'll go through the college search process, as Christina mentioned. They'll have the opportunity to put in up to 10 schools. And then after that, they can also go back in and update the schools. The actual application has honestly made it easier for the students to go back in and update those schools this year. There's an actual quick link button that takes them into the school listing process now so that they can hop back in, clear out some of those old schools. Maybe they decide, by second semester, they really know what they want to do. They didn't add the school that they needed to. That's an opportunity for them to jump back in and get that one updated. Housing plans. If a student is coming from outside of a broader radius than the school allows, they will need to live on campus. So it's important that they include this information on their financial aid application. When applying for financial aid, it's always important too that they get considered for all of the aid that they could possibly need. And then down the road, they would be able to adjust that as necessary, but ensure that they receive all of the support that they need going into school the first year.
I'm back, Sam. Thank you.
No problem. Go for it.
Okay, so another option that they have in the process is that they can see information about the schools they're applying to, so they can compare and contrast costs. And so for this slide, you can just kind of see that that's the report that they'll see if they select compare all schools. So dependency status, this is an important piece in the financial aid application process. If a student is over the age of 24, they are independent and they're going to report their own income and their spouses if applicable. If the student is under the age of 24, they have to meet certain special circumstances in order to be considered independent. And so most students for our high school populations are going to be considered independent, going to be considered dependent on their parents' income. Even though when we say this, again, we want to do that common definition thing. For students, when they see this, they see, I'm dependent. No, I'm an independent human. And so we want to acknowledge, yes, students, you're an independent human with independent thoughts and feelings. But for financial aid purposes for the FAFSA, you are dependent on your parents' income, typically till the age of 24. So the dependency determination is going to ask them some questions. It's going to ask them about their marital status. It's going to ask them about if they've been in foster care. And so the thing with this, as we go through these, it's important for students to read through these very thoroughly, as a reading comprehension exercise. And the reason for that is they may be in a situation that allows them to be independent. So it's going to ask if they have children or other dependents that they're providing 50% of the support or more for. It's going to ask them if they are in the military, if they're emancipated, if they're in a legal guardianship. It's going to ask if they've been at risk for homelessness or assessed as self-supporting and at risk for homelessness. And then if they say yes to this, it's going to ask them who made that determination. It gives them a list of people that can make that determination. If you're working with youth, and this is typically what they call McKinney-Vento determination. If you're working with youth who have McKinney-Vento determination, I encourage you, reach out to us at the 12th Year Campaign. The SLAP bracelets that we have information all in one spot for them, but also they can put their McKinney-Vento determination on it. So for independent students, this is a big one. So students who are independent, they'll say, do you want to provide parent information? And I have a lot of parents that will, or students that will tell me, they just read the part that says provide parent information or answer questions about your parents. They don't have to provide this information if they don't want to. There are some schools that require parental information from all students, but if they are independent, that it's just something that the school wants specifically, and sometimes that's through a CSS profile. So they don't have to answer questions about their parents. So if they are dependent, they need to provide parental information. If they can't, then there are some consequences to that that unfortunately are no fault of the students. Okay, so the impact of not providing parent information is that they can't, basically, it really limits what they can receive, and students may be eligible to get some student loans if they're lucky. There's not a lot they can receive if they don't have parent information, if they're considered dependent. What's more important is for the student to see if they meet the special circumstances that allow them to be considered at independent status. And for some students, it means doing a dependency override. And so for students, what the dependency override does is allows them to determine their dependency based upon the circumstances that a financial aid department can actually do this through a professional judgment. So here's the thing is like a lot of parents will say, well, we're just not going to provide this information. And we want parents to talk to the financial aid office to understand truly what the information is going to, like, by not providing that information, what's the impact of the student? So in determining who the parent is, I really love this year, a change to the financial aid application is that they actually kind of break it down who your parent could be, which was in this previous slide. But if they don't know, this document here is the Who's My Parent infographic. It is on your, it's gonna be on your Padlet. And what I like about this is I send this to students before I meet with them so they can determine without me being there who their parent is. Again, we're asking real private stuff. So when you're doing a financial aid event, especially if you're doing something in person with students, I highly encourage you to send this out early so they can talk about this with their family. Acknowledge that we are talking about what financial aid considers family, that this can be really painful for students who who have family that's not biological or related family that the financial aid department's asking about. The biggest things are for parents. If they're married, it's going to be both parents. If the parent is remarried, so if the parents are divorced, the parent who basically is where the student lives the most. So if the parent is remarried, then they want the student's parent and the step parent. If it's the parent single or widowed, then it's just the single parent. If the parent is unmarried, separated, divorced, but living together, number one, congratulations on navigating that situation. Number two, they want both your information. And then divorced, separated, but not living together, again, it's the parent you live with most. It's not about the taxes, it's about where they live the most. So then after that, it's going to go ahead and start asking information about the student's parents. So it's going to ask parent information. This is where sometimes our high school students have to pause because they don't know the parent information like birthdays. They may not know when they got married. We don't want them to guess. So the time to guess is not on a financial aid application. We want them to pause and talk to their family. The biggest thing to know is that if a parent doesn't have a social security number, no worries. They'll want to go ahead and put zeros into the box where it says enter your social here. They want to use zeros and not their ITIN number. An ITIN number is an individual tax-paying identification number that undocumented families will use to pay taxes. So in this part here, it's very natural to think I'm talking about my taxes. I'll use that number. But what you need them to do is put zeros in there because if not, it'll show an error code. It's going to ask about where the parents have lived. And then it's going to ask about the parents' dependents. How many people are living in the household? One situation we have a lot of this year, and we did last year, is families that haven't filed taxes for the year financial aid that they're applying. And so we may have families that haven't filed for 2020 taxes. If that's the case, they can go ahead and select will file. And they'll just click, it'll say that they have to verify and they'll click OK and it'll move them on to the next page. They will not be able to use the data retrieval tool because they haven't filed taxes yet. So if they haven't filed taxes, they won't use data retrieval tool. They'll use estimated numbers based upon their W-2s. For the data retrieval tool, this is a tool that you can, that families can use. They have to have an Fsa ID in order to use it, and only certain types of tax returns are eligible for the data retrieval tool. And what it does is connects the parents' and students' tax information directly to the financial aid application. When you're using this tool, you want to make sure that you're putting in the address as listed exactly on the taxes. If you don't do that, it could create an error and then it won't transmit the taxes over. So if the taxes show everything in all caps, it has to be in all caps. If the person who prepared the taxes put a space in the very beginning before the address starts, that character is now part of the address for the Fsa ID data retrieval tool. So you have to put it in as exactly listed. Next slide. So for families that don't have access to data retrieval tool, they'll be manually entering in their taxes. If they have any questions about where on the application, it tells them the line on the form, and then it can always hover over the question mark and it'll give them more information about that question. going to ask about parent income. So it's going to ask about parent 1 and parent 2. This is asked whether they import taxes or not. So if a family is importing their taxes with the data retrieval tool, it means they still need to have access to their taxes so they know what the parent split is for income. It's going to ask for taxes. Now, so one of the questions was, why may they not have access to data retrieval tool? You have to have an Fsa ID in order to access the data retrieval tool, and you have to have a social security number in order to have an Fsa ID. So that's one reason. If you have amended your taxes, you cannot use the data retrieval tool. And if your marital status has changed from tax year to current, you can't use the data retrieval tool. So there are some limiting factors, unfortunately. On here, they're going to enter, this is a key one, making sure that they enter in their taxes on this, not how much they earn, but how much they pay to income taxes. This is one of the common errors, is having your taxes paid equal income. And then it's going to have additional parent income information. So it's going to talk about child support that was paid, child support that was received, if they've received any other types of funds. And if they use the data retrieval tool, this is automatically imported. Then it's going to ask about assets. It's going to ask, do you have assets that exceed $4,100? And so that's cash checking savings in their accounts. That includes if they have businesses with more than 100 people. That includes if they have more than one resident. So if they have multiple homes, the residence that they live in is not considered an asset, but if they have like rental homes or additional properties, those are considered assets as well. If their assets do not exceed $4,100, they can say no, and it'll skip this section. I will say this, in this section, when I'm working with families, I always turn my back around. Like, this is really private stuff again. And I've had parents who've told me, I feel like I'm supposed to have more money in there than I have. And they'll say they have more money in there because they're embarrassed. There's nothing wrong with how much money someone has in cash checking and savings. It's just what they have. They just have to put what is actually in there. The reality is that a lot of families, I do this a lot, don't have cash checking and savings and don't have savings. And that's just the reality of what's going on right now. And so there's no shame on whether people have assets or not. I've had a couple of parents who just like pull me aside and say, am I supposed to have more than one home at this point? I'm like, no, most people don't have one. It's okay. One of the assets that we do get asked a lot about is the 529 plans, and it really depends on if it's the student's 529 plan or the parent. So who is the owner of the 529 plan or the college savings plan, and that's whose asset it'll be. And then the student's going to get asked the same questions about their income. So if the student didn't work in 2020, they're just going to select not going to file. So if they didn't file taxes in 2020, they select not file. And then it's going to ask them the same questions: money they earned from work. It's going to ask if they've paid or received child support. And I know that there's some opportunity for skipped logic questions in here, and they're working on that with FAFSA simplification. Next slide. Then it's going to ask about the student assets. Now this one, it does not, for the student assets, it typically is not going to ask them, do you have $4,100 or more in assets? And so for this, it's going to be the student's cash checking and savings, not what the family has, but what the student owns as an individual, then their investments, including real estate, and then if they have farms. And then the 529 plan would go in here as well. So for 529 plans, if they have a college savings plan, they want to see who the owner of the college savings plan is. If the student is the owner of the college saving plan, it's going to be a student asset. And if the parent is the owner of it, then it's the parent asset. And I'm trying to, sorry, I'm skimming the chat as I'm presenting. So if I skip your question, we'll get to it at the end. Yes, the Padlet's accessible to anybody with the link. Now, at the end of this, it's going to start asking you to verify information. It's going to also kind of identify what could potentially be an error. So in this section, if you have a parent that has no social security number and they put zeros in, it's going to have the student verify that. And so they just verify it once and the type of form. They just click check for errors and we'll continue them through the application, but it will resolve that error as long as it stays with zeros. Then they get the Fafsa Summary, and the summary really just is a summary of the application. It gives them a list of all the questions they were just asked and the answers they provided. This is another format for them to see the application and maybe even address any mistakes that are in there. And then you get to the signature page, and the signature page, the student's just going to click sign, and they have their FSA ID, and that's what they sign with. So the parent will need to sign if the student's considered dependent, and then they will pick which parent is going to sign the application. The parent has two options to sign. They can sign with, well, three, the FSA ID, but if they don't have an FSA ID, they can print a signature page or submit without signatures. So the fastest way to sign the application is with the FSA ID, but if a parent doesn't have a FSA ID, no worry, they can print a signature page and send that in. And then they can also submit without signatures, and then they can go back in and submit later. So for some families, I've had parents who are like, I don't have time right now to do my FSA ID, but I want you to submit this, and then tomorrow I'll do my FSA ID, I'll go in and sign it then. I do see a question about if a student files dependent or independent, they'd want a parent to change the owner of the 529. So no matter what, the student's going to end up receiving the 529 plan. So whoever they're getting it from, it's going to transition from the parent to the student no matter what, because it's going to be transitioned into funds the student receives. So it really doesn't depend on the owner. Changing the owner doesn't impact the aid that much. So they'll pick their way they're going to submit, and then they're going to submit their financial aid application. I made this slide specifically because we have students that forget to click submit my FAFSA form now. I'm not joking. This is just one of those things because it's just an extra step. So just making sure they click submit and that they've received confirmation. And then here's the confirmation. The confirmation will also have what's called the student aid report, and it has information about their colleges, their EFC. On here, you're going to want to make sure that they have submitted the right form. So when they go into their application, they can actually go into the application itself, and it'll tell them, like, you've submitted this form. You can still do corrections and things like that, and this is the form you haven't submitted, just to make sure they've submitted the right one. This is an important piece to do if you're looking at your FAFSA completion portal, and then all of a sudden your student's saying, I totally completed this form. And if they haven't, if they have, they may have completed the wrong year. Okay, and then corrections. So last year, the corrections page looked like 1994. No worries. Now it looks like the rest of the application. I say that because students would ask me, like, am I on the right page or is this a scam? The pages all look the same now. The branding is the same. They can correct their application. They can view their correction history, and they can update their schools. There are 3 different separate functions. When they correct their application, they can go ahead and just do it by section. So if they just need to update schools, they just select that and they can update their schools. Okay, before we jump into the WASFA line by line, any other questions?
Yeah, I was grabbing questions as we were going through, Christina. We can read through them real quick and then hop into the WASFA.
Yep, I think I see one. Okay, if a family owns their own company but have less than 100 employees and they use their checking and savings for their company, how do they enter the dollar amounts? If those are their, so if they have like commingled accounts where it's their private checkings and savings that they're using for their business entity, they have to list whatever's in their checking and savings regardless, because it's commingled. So that's one thing that they may want to reach out to their financial aid office on, is to say, like, while we do have these funds, it's actually part of our business. They must choose one college, correct? Oh, how can they change colleges mid-year? So they have to at least choose a minimum of one college on their FAFSA application, because they have to send the information somewhere. And they can go on the application anytime and add schools. So if they decide to move schools like mid-year, they just need to go into their application and add the school that they're going to be attending. Oh, students who have completed the FAFSA portal. Okay, so the FAFSA portal data, some of it's coming in. You'll see FAFSA completion data, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. If you're like, oh my gosh, data, if you're really excited, don't worry, spoilers, we're getting to it at the end. But if you're worried about your portal, no worries. It's next week, we should start seeing those numbers come in. We've only had a couple schools data start to reconcile. Usually by the end of October, we see our actual first sets of data. Okay. Off to the WAFSA.
All right. So as we head into the WASFA section, one of the things that I do want to note is that a lot of this information is going to sound relatively similar because the information that's being asked for is relatively similar. This application in particular, however, compared to the FAFSA, will only consider students' eligibility for state financial aid. So it's important to know that, you know, one is for one set of things and one is for the other. For the FAFSA in particular, when students apply for the FAFSA, they are being considered for federal aid, but they will also be considered for state aid as well. So it's not as though FAFSA students filling out the FAFSA are missing out on any of the state aid opportunities. Now, general tips for the WASFA. It's important to know that we're here doing this training to learn about the applications and how they work, but we are not the preparers, very similar to what Christina had mentioned earlier about the WASFA application. It's important to be mindful with the WASFA. We do have a majority of students who fill out the WASFA doing it because there is some sensitivity around their family circumstances involved. And so we want to be mindful that we're not being the keepers of their information for them. As I said, it assesses for state financial aid only, and the website for the actual application is right down there at the bottom of the slide. Now, one of the cool things about Washington State Aid is that we have programs like the Washington College Grant, as Christina had mentioned, where students will be considered for this opportunity. It's more types of education opportunities for more students using that state financial aid package to cover that cost of, to support students in covering the cost of tuition. As an example, a student from a family of 4 that makes around $56,000 per year would be eligible to receive a full Washington College Grant award, all the way up to a similar sized family making $102,000 a year being eligible for a partial award. And so that's what we mean by covering a broader range of students. There are more students that are eligible to receive some type of funding from the Washington College Grant. Now, the WASFA application has moved home pages from the Ready Set Grad website, which is sunsetted or is in the process of sunsetting. It's redirecting folks to the WSAC website now, where we're hosting this information and including the actual WASFA application. So you'll head over there, get logged in. And then we wanted to make note, again, similar to the FAFSA, students will be applying for the 2022-2023 FAFSA, or excuse me, the WASFA. Just like on the FAFSA, there's going to be multiple aid years available just in case there is a student in a situation where they do need aid for this actual academic year. Those of you who were on the previous WASFA, the current WASFA still has the eligibility questionnaire at the beginning of the application. This is a great way for students to help themselves self-assess for which application is going to work best for them. It asks, I believe, 4 questions to determine which application would be the one that students want to do. And then from there, it will bounce them to the appropriate landing pages, whether it's back to the FAFSA to create login information, or over to the WASFA application to start that process. These are more questions from the questionnaire. As I said, it'll bounce you over to the WASFA application. And then also another additional resource that it provides during the login process is a link to the washboard. That's a great opportunity, another resource for help for students to help self-assess for more financial aid opportunities. Now, students that don't qualify for the FAFSA or the WASFA are in a particular situation, but it's a great way to approach this situation with students is to treat that same process as though they were applying for aid by doing it with scholarship applications. There are a ton of great resources out there for students to engage with to look for scholarships, and those scholarships can accumulate to cover that cost of attendance for students, but it does take some work, sometimes some effort, and there are great resources out there available. There are some on the WASAC website, in addition to additional resources on things like the Gear Up website, at the colleges themselves. So there's a few places that you can look to help find those different sources of aid. Now, as I kind of alluded to before, we want to make sure that the students applying for aid abide by the rule of one. Either they're going to apply for the FAFSA or the WASFA, but never both. They'll attest so and then be moved to this page of information and instructions. So a privacy statement that lets students know how their information will be used in assessment for financial aid, and then a checklist of information that students and families will need to bring with them in order to complete the application. Now they'll head over to this page, they'll create their account. Similar to when you have a student create a FSA ID, you'll want them to use contact information that isn't tied to their high school. So an email address that isn't one that they're going to lose access to eventually, and a phone number and information that they're going to continue to use after that they've graduated. Again, multiple grad years. The way that the WASFA application has it laid out is actually pretty cool. There are a couple of icons that let students know what step in the process that they are on and what information they still have required. So it's a really good landing page for students to kind of get a glimpse at where they're at in their application process. And then they'll move on to the demographics section. They'll fill out the information about themselves. They'll also include their birth date and information on there. Driver's license and DACA information. Students will punch this information in. The bottom box down there is an opportunity for them to provide Social Security or a DACA number or ITIN number, but it is not a required field, but they do have an opportunity to provide that information there. One of the questions that we do get is if a student is applying for the WASFA, but they do have a Social Security number, why don't they just apply for the FAFSA? And it's a really important thing to consider that they might be thinking about the safety and security of their family, their loved ones. And so we want to make sure the students have all the information that they could possibly have so that they can make that informed decision for themselves. Further contact information, as I said, really want to make sure students use an email address that they can continue to access once they have graduated from high school. Just like the FAFSA, students are going to apply for financial aid every year that they're in school, and so they'll need to get back into this account every October 1st to do so. And then it's going to go through some family information for the student, the marital status of the parent, or the marital status of the student, excuse me, and then asking about the student's household size and any other students in college. Now, keep in mind, this is particular to the student. As you go through the WASFA, you can see over there on the left-hand side of the screen, it gives you kind of like a timeline of the steps in that application. And so we want to make sure under this section, the student is providing the information as it relates to the student. Now, Washington State residency information, as Christina mentioned, the same thing goes for the WASFA application. One rainy season in Washington, one rainy year in Washington, leading up to that first term of receiving aid is what you need to make you eligible for Washington State financial aid. They're going to provide that residency information here. One of the things that you may notice, or students may notice as they're going through this process, is that it's a dynamic process. As they start to answer certain questions on the application, it'll bump out with more information or additional questions as necessary. This is where they're going to start to put in information about their education plans. So what level of degree that they're going for, similar to, as Christina mentioned, if a student's doing Running Start or anything like that, in a technical sense, they, yes, have gone to school, but they will still be a first-year freshman, never attended college. After that, dependency determination, and just like the FAFSA application, other related engagements like military information, those kinds of things will pop up here. Further dependency information and whether or not the student has been at risk for homelessness. Just like the FAFSA application, this is a great opportunity for students to kind of state more about their circumstances that can trigger other resources, whether through the state or at the institutions themselves. Kind of like I mentioned, you want to make sure that you help students get through this process and get through it as accurately as possible, so that way they have the additional supports that they may need as they make this transition into their next steps after graduation from high school. Special circumstances, want to make sure students put that information as accurately as possible as well. Just like with the FAFSA and going through COVID right now, a lot of family circumstances have changed. So it's important that we make sure we get an accurate picture of the financial circumstances of the student and their families. It's going to transition into providing income information for the student specifically. So you'll want to make sure if the student did work, they did provide that information. If not, which is more than likely the case for students getting ready to go through this process for this first time, you'll leave all of this information blank as necessary. Further student income information, tax benefits, resource programs, different things like that. Any child supports paid. Again, this is from the student perspective, not the parent perspective. And then further child support, military benefits, veteran benefits, those sorts of things. Then from there, the FAFSA, or excuse me, the WASFA application does a good job of kind of sectioning out the process of the application. They focus on the student section first so that they can get through everything there and not have to go back and forth, kind of like the FAFSA application has families do. You'll get to the parent information section and put the information as required, household size, number of students in college, so on and so forth, marital status as well. This works very similarly to the FAFSA application, so that document is a good document for students to reference when trying to determine that for this application. This is where students will be asked, or excuse me, parents will be asked to provide Social Security number if it is something that they have. If they don't, they can put in all zeros just like the FAFSA application. WASFA application has had a better track record of accepting all zeros, a little humble brag for the WASFA application, but that's what parents can do as they look to enter this information. It's important to note, parents do not want to use their ITIN numbers. You know, they are hardworking, tax-paying members of our society, and so they'll want to proudly show that, you know, they have a stable income for their families and want to use their ITIN number, but this will throw an error code their way. So you want to make sure if they don't have a Social Security number to put in there, they put all zeros. When parents put in email address information, some families will share email addresses as they go through this process to make sure everything comes together in one spot. For this application in particular, students and parents will want to use different email addresses because at the end of the application, it will email out a request for a signature to the email addresses that you put in this application. So putting the same email address won't work for this, so you'll want to make sure students and parents each use their own email address as they go through this process. Then it'll transition into parent income information. Unfortunately, we don't have access to the data retrieval tool through this process, but it's really important that parents gather all of this information to get through it, just like they would if a parent was going through the FAFSA process with their student. It's really helpful to have all of these documents on hand, so that way if further information is requested, it's very easy for them to reach for that information and be able to type it in. So giving checklists out of required materials ahead of time in the lead up to an event or something like that can be helpful in getting more families through this process in one sitting. Additional supports that the family may be receiving: information about bank income information, real estate and investments, business information, and child support paid, and then other benefits that the parent may be receiving: veterans benefits, pension, those kinds of things, child support received as well. All of that is going to be recorded down and considered. And then for the last part, kind of lied a little bit, it does bounce back to the student, but this is kind of a process that can be helpful for both the students and the parents to go through together. Selecting the schools, looking at all of the information, seeing what the cost of attendance is going to be, making the consideration for on-campus housing versus off-campus housing versus being a commuter student and still living at home. All of these conversations can be very helpful for the students and their families to have together. And so this is an opportunity for them to do so and also include those schools on the applications so that the information can be sent there. Now, at the end, they're going to receive their disclosure information about signing the application electronically. One of the things that I mentioned earlier on in the chat, there were some considerations about technology requirements. It's been very finicky for the last couple of weeks. So there's some information about what could be helpful in trying different browsers, downloading the most up-to-date version of your browsers, those sorts of things. So here, they'll fill out the information again: name, first and last, their login password, current city, state. All of this is what's used for the digital signature for the WASFA application. And then here is where they're going to send out, that email that I mentioned for parents to sign. Once they do receive that email, and I'll pass it off here in a second, this is, like I said, a great landing page for students to go back through and check to see if their application has been processed properly, just like on the FAFSA application as well. You can get this process started, students and families can get this process started and then revisit the application to update schools that they want their information sent to as well. So it's important that they know that, so that way there's no holdup, there's no reason to wait on that process moving forward. And that's it for the WASFA application.
Next up, we have our awesome Dinda, who is going to talk about financial aid myths and challenges. Take it away, Dinda.
Thank you, Christina and Sam. So here are some myths and challenges around financial aid. And the first one is students can't receive financial aid for a quarter or semester if they miss the financial aid application deadline. And what do you think? Da, 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 da. That's a myth. And so schools have to pay back students for any quarter or semester that a student completes credits and they are eligible for funding. One thing to consider is to help students change the use of the word deadline, because this can create a sense of finality in the student's mind. So maybe use a word that could be like priority processing dates. And we will move on to the next one. Number 2 is if a student is college bound, scholarship eligible, then they will have all school expenses covered. It's a full ride. Is that true? Thank you. Next slide. So that is a myth. College bound is meant to make sure tuition is covered. As it expands, students will receive a small disbursement to help them with expenses. However, outside of tuition, students should be thinking about how they're going to cover all their other expenses, including housing. College band is also income-based, and so some students can be disappointed to find that they don't meet the income requirements. So encourage students to focus on how they're going to cover all of their school expenses, since financial aid only tends to cover tuition and books. Yeah, thank you. Let's go to the third myth. Students cannot appeal their financial aid award. Next slide. Yes, students can actually appeal their award by contacting their financial aid office. So are there any myths out there that you guys have heard of that you would want to share? Please feel free to put them in the chat, or you're free to unmute and share some myths.
I'm seeing some come in. Parents that believe they make too much money won't qualify for aid. Oh, that one goes right to the heart, right to the heart. We see that one quite a bit.
I have one. It's not necessarily a myth. My brother's actually a first-year student in college right now, and you know, he thought that financial aid was just one thing. It was just like, that was the money, financial aid, here it is. When in reality, financial aid is a mix of things. It's state aid, it's federal aid, it's work study, it's loans, and each of those components work a little bit differently. And so the, I guess, myth is that it's just this all-encompassing thing, when in reality, it's moving parts.
Great, yeah.
Oh,
go ahead, Christina.
One just came in. That's one I actually got asked last night. Can you still get financial aid if you already have a certificate or a degree? And that's a big one. And so it depends on your degree and how many degrees you have. Like if you've collected them like Pokemon, you may not have eligibility left because you have so many different degrees. I've had students who are like, I'm just collecting them all. And I'm like, that's not how it works. But, you know, there's other things you can collect. Like I have all sorts of tchotchkes over here. But the other pieces I'm hearing is that you can't get financial aid if you're not in high school anymore. And that's not true either. Financial aid is for anyone who's pursuing post-secondary education, whether they're an adult or a teenager. It just really depends on if you qualify as an individual for aid.
Yeah. And this is one that I can speak on actually because I'm in school too. I'm in school and I am getting financial aid. So yeah, you can. I have a bachelor's degree, and then now I'm in my master program, and I am actually getting financial aid, so you can.
Oh, this is a good one. If you have an EFC of 0, the college has to cover like everything. Like that's not the case either. There's still some unmet need that can occur. And so I tell students, like, I'm the most frugal woman of like Thurston County. I'm willing to take challenges, maybe even Western Washington. And so there's a lot of ways to reduce the cost of education and college. And so some students will say, well, like I have to buy the books from the bookstore, or like it's going to cover everything. And that's not always the case. Yes, and that some students think that financial aid is just loans. Like I hear that too. Or that I just don't need to apply. I'm not going to get financial aid, so I'm not going to apply. But if they need student loans, then where are they getting the student loans from? Oh, and Jen, I see your comment. The one of the ones you hear is the FAFSA form is really long, it's complicated, not worth filing. And so that's the one we hear, and we're really excited for FAFSA simplification coming down the road, because this form that's 108 questions will become 38-ish questions, and then in another couple years. And that's why we're also providing those support events too. Yeah, we're really excited. It's going to get easier, I promise y'all, with less questions. Hopefully we'll reduce some of the myths that are out there. Mm-hmm. For annual, someone asked, what's the full amount of aid? So a maximum federal Pell for this current school year is around $6,500. That's the Pell grant, not just loans and stuff, but that's just gift aid.
I think that was my question. It wasn't what's the total. So what's the rule about if somebody already has a bachelor's degree in English can they come back to community college and get a, an associate's degree in whatever, nursing or whatever?
So if they're changing fields, that's a big piece. Is like if they're changing fields, then you're changing programs. You will have to. It's when someone's going into like the same program. Basically, they're trying to take credits they don't need towards a degree. So typically, if you're changing careers and you're going into a different program, and you haven't defaulted on loans and haven't maxed out your lifetime of loans, you typically can be eligible for aid if you've changed programs. And if someone's changing programs and getting something from the community college, they also want to check with like WorkSource and other programs to see if there's additional funding that can help support other things of returning adults, like childcare costs and transportation and things like that. Oh. And so it can be a little squishy. The best thing to do is for the student to go into their FAFSA portal, because it'll tell them how much in loans they have available to them and what they have in aid available to them. And so it'll talk about program changes and things like that. If they go into their main page of their portal, it has everything there. And that's new. And I love it because it's also a great spot for parents to check and see if they have if they have their own student debt before taking out Parent Plus loans. Let's see. Oh, and then for loan information, we have a loan advocate, and we have that information at the end for you. And it's in the Padlet too, but we have a student loan advocate in Washington State who can help support students in understanding loans and be good consumers of their loans. The last one that came up is the students that believe they're not Washington State residents because they're undocumented. And that residency law change has just happened this year, where it went from 3 years in Washington State for residency down to 1 for undocumented students. And we're so excited. We have things in your flash drive in that Padlet that talk about the new residency law, but it went from 3 years for undocumented students prior to starting college to 1 year prior to starting college for residency. And then for that question about eligibility for if they have a degree at another college or from another country, it depends on if they're eligible. They have to see if they're eligible for federal aid in the states. They have to meet federal aid requirements. And so if they have, basically they want to look and see if they meet the residency requirements for aid. Any other myths that we're hearing? Thank you for sharing those myths. There's a lot of them out there. See, you guys know there's so many, Dinah, aren't there? Like,
yeah,
so many myths.
There was one that I don't know if you touched on, if a student, sorry, I'm going up. If the student believe that they don't have to fill out the FAFSA because they have all these grants.
They already have a scholarship or two.
Yeah, like they've been given, they've been awarded scholarships that will cover the cost of tuition. Should they still sign up for FAFSA?
Oh, and that's a definite, because some of them are like, I'm getting college bound scholarship. I don't have to apply for financial aid. But part of the financial aid that they part of their pledge for college bound is that they'll apply for aid. So we want to make sure they're applying for aid to maximize. Our goal is to make sure that they're reducing their financial burden of going to college as much as possible so that this generation doesn't take all the loans like my generation did. And so it's really about getting all the different pieces to help fund it.
Yeah, and that misconception about those scholarships paying for everything too could come from, the most genuine of places. A student's done their research, they saw this number online, and they got a scholarship for this much. Mm-hmm. But, we've all gone out and purchased something or done something, and there's weird hidden fees and charges that come up. And so that can definitely happen as students go through this process. Once they've received their financial aid award letter that outlines the cost of attendance, that's where those weird little fees and lab fees and those things come up. So encouraging them to keep the ball rolling, even though you may seem like you have enough, there are hidden costs out there. There are things that may come up. Emergency situations do happen. And so applying for financial aid is another one of those things that students can do to kind of shore up their plans as they're moving forward.
Oh, thank you. And then last question. Oh, did you see that one?
Yeah, the residency. So how can undocumented students prove residency? It's pretty easy. I encourage students, so they're going to look at their parents' residency as well. They can use a bill that came to the house, leases, rental leases, the fact that they were in school in Washington State and they're graduating from Washington State School, their school records can be used. So there's a lot of ways to prove residency. If a family is looking to prove residency, I always encourage the first step to showing that you want to be a Washington State resident is to getting a Washington State ID. It doesn't have to be a license, it could just be a state ID. And that really shows that your intent is to become a resident of the state that you're living in.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So with that, we will move on to financial aid appeals. So this is when the student has applied for financial aid and has not gotten the award. So so what are some of the things to remember when that happens? So when it comes to financial aid appeals, students should reach out directly to the financial aid office of the school that they have applied to. They can also utilize the Swift Student, which is a great resource to help students understand appeals. This tool also has templates to aid students when it comes to writing these appeal letters. And then lastly, students don't have to worry about the information they share and worry whether or not that will be shared with third parties. So this is just information that will be contained with Swift Student. And then Swift Student also provides guidance and like I talked about, a list of templates that students can choose from by simply selecting a topic that best fits their situation or circumstances that they are going through. This can be anything from a student's financial situation changing after they have applied for financial aid. Maybe it could be that they need help with food or housing. Maybe they need help with car repairs, childcare, or maybe just an extension for a missed deadline when it comes to financial aid submissions. And then one thing to remember, all these templates are designed for students who are currently receiving or applying for federal financial aid. Another thing to remember is that even if the appeal is not accepted, the financial aid office can better direct the students to other resources once they better understand the student's situation. So it's always good to appeal, because then the school might be able to help the student, sorry. And we will move to common errors and how to fix them. And Christina will take this one.
I think
Christina,
Christina might, I think
oh,
she might be having technical problems. Before we move on to common errors, I'll answer Jennifer's question real quick about Swift Student, and then we'll head into the common errors and see if Christina's back. So Swift Student is a website that actually Christina had the opportunity to speak with one of the people that put it together, but essentially it's an appeals website that helps students kind of understand the lingo around financial aid and translate what they have to say, their circumstances, why they need an appeal, why they need to have their financial aid reconsidered. The website helps them translate that into a form that the financial aid office can actually use to make those reconsiderations, instead of just, you know, a regular like handwritten letter saying, you know, my financial circumstances is this. It's an actual document that's like requesting that change. And so it's a great resource to help students kind of get through that process. And especially with COVID in mind, a lot of students, a lot of families have been seeing great benefit from this because it has a lot of templates that address those sorts of things. So hopping into the common errors and how to fix them, matching your name with your social security number. So a lot of students may be going through a period of transition. And so they may be putting in information on their financial aid application that, you know, they identify by, whereas that name might not be what's listed on the social security a card. And so if they happen to put in the wrong information, they'll want to make sure that whatever name that they're entering in as they're going through this transition process is the name that's on their current Social Security card. And then once that information has been updated, that's something that a student can then go back in and change once that change is official.
One thing I do want to add, I apologize for technology issues. Technology is wonderful in 2021, like it was last year. When you're working with students, especially when we're talking about federal processes and identity, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that this is a flawed system and that what is reflected in the application may not be who the student is themselves. And it can be very dangerous to have to use dead names. And I think it's important to talk about that with students, to say, like, this is a process that's flawed. Right now, we have to list whatever is listed on your Social Security card, but we can change it. I also encourage the student to use their preferred name and pronouns in their application where it lists it for the admissions application. The best thing you can do for counselors, if you are entering information into CEDARS and there is a name change, your CEDARS name change updates are much quicker than Social Security name updates. I can then match the student's information based upon name changes in the FAFSA portal so that it's matching. So that kind of helps you see the data itself, but that's the easiest way to do it. So the incorrect financial aid year is one of the biggest. It's like the #1 error. And I think it's just important to tell students, like, you've learned how to do an initial, like, I always try to keep it positive. Like, I'm not saying like Pollyanna it, but I'm just saying, like, hey, you learned how to do an initial submission, and now you also are going to learn how to do a renewal, which is what you're going to need to know how to do in college. And so if they say, I've completed it, but I haven't received anything back, have them look in their application to see which year they completed. If they completed the wrong year, that's okay. Just have them go back in and do the correct year. Okay, adjusted gross income equals taxes paid. So AGI equals taxes paid is an error code that will show when they have entered their taxes paid is equal to or larger than their income. So I tell students, like, if you made $60,000 last year and all of a sudden you paid $60,000 in taxes, woo, Uncle Sam took more than his fair share. It's probably not the case. They want to make sure, and the reason that this is an issue is because students don't know what tax forms are, and they probably shouldn't at this point. They're learning it, but they are not tax experts. So when they see taxes paid, they're not 100% sure what that line is. And so they just want to go back in and update it. And they can use the data retrieval tool to do that if they are eligible for it, but they do have to update it in the system. So using ITIN number instead of zeros, they just want to go back in. I know we've said it 100 times, but literally if they go back in and put the ITIN number in, it creates an error then that is going to keep the application from being processed all the way. So they want to make sure that they use zeros instead of an ITIN. And it's a super easy fix in the system. Okay, supporting student applicants. So we have multiple types of students, like students are from different populations. We want to make sure we're supporting different populations with this process. No matter who you're working with, providing resources and translated materials is really wonderful, and it helps make sure that everyone has the same information. There are translated materials, and we'll talk about more, but on your Padlet, under translated resources section. Remember that technology access is going to differ, and that sometimes it's not even like access to the internet, but access to different devices. So like certain types of Chromebooks don't work really well in the financial aid application. There's also certain Chromebooks that you can't access different devices with or different platforms with. So they want to make sure that they have access to everything in there. If there is gaps in technology, trying to address it by providing events, maybe partnering with local libraries, other places that will have maybe more access to technology. I also encourage you to send out there are maps to free Wi-Fi spots for each county, and I'll try to find the link. I think it's in the Padlet. I send that out to students beforehand when I meet with them so that they can get to a Wi-Fi spot if they don't have Wi-Fi at home. Having students create that FSA ID or the parents create it before applying for financial aid or coming to one of your events is amazing. And students can do that as early as, like, they can do it as early as they want. So like if you have juniors right now, you can have them do the FSA ID as like an activity preparing for next year's application. At WASFA, you just have to create the account so it's a similar feel. And then when possible, we have large scale events. We'd love to help support students. Just send them to our events so we can help them. And then someone asked, can you explain the AGI taxes paid thing again? So adjusted gross income, if it equals in the application, the adjusted gross income equals the amount as taxes paid, it will throw an error code because it knows that you can't pay more taxes than on what you earned. And so they just have to adjust the taxes paid to the correct amount. It's just the error code that gets thrown if they do a larger tax amount than money earned. Okay, so specific populations, we're going to talk about high school students, returning adults, and current college students. So for high school students, they're going to be new to this college process and the different processes that come with it. And they may be looking at you with big saucer eyes going, what? In addition to this, they're doing like a million other things right now. And they may not all have the same priority level. Like I ask students whenever I work with them, what's something you want people like me who do this work in college access to know? And a lot of the seniors will tell me, we do something with our lives right now that's not just financial aid. Like we have school and dances and sports, and we haven't been in person in forever. And so financially may not be on the top of our list. Making sure that there are special considerations for first generation, for youth in care, undocumented students, mixed status families, students experiencing homelessness, students who are going to have potentially some different questions on that application, or students who are going to be considered independent. One of the rumors I heard last year is that students who have independent applications are harder to complete. And that is not the case, because independent students are just their own information, and they're a lot quicker to complete because they don't have to provide parent information. Also, these students should be receiving financial aid information through their high schools for Financial Aid Advising Day between September 1st and December 1st. Next slide. Okay, our returning adults. So we want to make sure that when we're working with returning adults, they may have already accessed aid, and that may impact how much they're eligible for. So we want to make sure that they're still eligible for aid and make sure they understand any restrictions for aid that they might have. The application is going to look different than it did potentially when they had filled it out previously. They may say oh, my FAFSA PIN, now it's an FSA ID, things like that. They may be co-enrolling in programs that have specific requirements. So they may be coming to your school to get help with financial aid, but they may also be applying for a program where they have to meet with worker retraining with a worker retraining officer, or they may need assistance with completing their commissioner approved training applications. And then the other considerations are childcare and just the challenges of just returning to school as an adult psychologically, adding the role of being a student to the other roles that are in an adult student's life. Next slide. And then current college students. Current college students are students that they are students from last year. So the students that you worked with last year, who we worked so hard to get them to complete their applications for financial aid, they may not be aware that they need to apply right now for financial aid for this next upcoming year. And I encourage you to invite them to our financial aid completion events. I had students that I worked with last year who were seniors last year who came to our completion event last week and got help applying for aid. So they can get help from the colleges they go to, but they can also come to one of our 12th year campaign completion events. There may be scholarships they need to apply for if they have unmet need, especially if they have non-renewable scholarships. And then they just want to make sure that if they are struggling with the financial aid process in any way, shape, or form, that they're reaching out to their financial aid office. The biggest thing is financial aid officers aren't psychic. If they were, they'd probably have other jobs. So until we have an amazing force of psychic financial aid officers, students have to reach out when they're struggling or they don't know. So they want to make sure that every year when they're applying for aid, if they have any questions, that they're checking in with their officers. Okay, and then verification. So about 1/3 of your students are going to be picked for verification. And basically, it's a process to verify the information that's submitted on an application to make sure that it matches the current, the information of the student. So no fret. It is a standard practice. Students are randomly pooled, but sometimes students are picked to clarify information. I always tell students you're not at fault. This is what happens. I was picked for verification when I worked in a financial aid office, and they're like, can you verify your employer? And I'm like, y'all paid me last week. Like, I showed up today. Like, I'm pretty sure this is me verifying I work here, right? They're like, no, you have to actually go through the formal process. It's important for students to pay attention to the dates on these requests. So here's the thing about the requests. They can come as a postcard saying check your portal. It can be a portal notification. They could send a letter. They could even, I mean, at this point, they could send a pigeon with a letter tied to its leg. I don't care how the office reaches out to the student. If the student doesn't respond back to the verification request, the office, financial aid office, is unable to disperse aid. No matter what they want to do to help the student, they can't disperse the aid until they have verification completed. So they have to make sure they're meeting those deadlines. Again, don't be afraid to ask questions though. So as students are picked, they're picked either by the Department of Education, they're picked by the schools, and there's something that students can kind of collect now to help prepare for this. So students can request their IRS tax transcripts now for the 2020 tax year. And that way that if they get requested, if they get picked for verification, they have a copy of their tax transcript ready to go. Tax transcripts can be pulled directly from the internet for some families if they meet certain income requirements and have ways to verify their identity, like having a mortgage or a cell phone and a credit card. There's a list. Not all of our families have those things. And so you can also order your tax return transcript online, and it takes a little bit more time. We want to make sure that sometimes it's just easy for them to order it ahead of time, and that way they can just put it with their taxes each year, and if they get picked for verification, they can pull it out and send it in. And then here's just what the tax return looks like versus the tax transcript. They're two different documents. So again, no one's done anything wrong. There's no shaming in it. It's just that you get picked for verification. Everyone potentially could get picked. It's 1 in 3 that are getting picked right now. Consistent information. They want to make sure they're consistently providing the information from what they provided in the application to what is now. And again, and this breaks my heart to say it because I had students last year that no matter the number of tiers that were poured, that they could not receive their aid because they didn't finish their verification. I had 3. It breaks my heart. These are literally the things that keep me from sleeping at night. So if your students struggle with verification, have them reach out to their college, because financial aid officers are the same about it. They're like, no, we don't want students to miss out on this opportunity. Next slide. Okay, let's talk about resources.
Thank you. We know that securing funds for college is an important step for students planning to go to college. So here are some resources that can help remove barriers for students to access money for college. And the first resource is, go back to the financial aid, the first one. Yeah, thank you. So PSCCN Financial Aid Toolkit. The goal of this toolkit is to equip educators or anyone assisting students with navigating the financial aid process. This toolkit contains centralized financial aid resources to support students and families. This toolkit includes promotional materials that can help bring awareness, financial aid awareness for students. In the promotional materials, you will find banners, which are both in English and Spanish, event flyers, posters, sticky note, stickers, and desktop wallpaper. And this here is an example. I don't know if you can see stickers that you can give students once they have finished their financial aid application. And you're welcome. We have a few hundred, so you're welcome to claim a few. So yeah, you can reach out to us. And then the next one in blue is the financial aid strategies. And here you will find several strategies that educators can use to better support their students to increase financial aid completion. And then in this section, you also find common scenarios that can be a roadblock for students, like residency, various kinds of tax problems, verification. This toolkit provides guidance on how to move forward in the application process. And then the last one is financially student and family resources. And here you will find, sorry, it's very small, I cannot read. Okay, PowerPoint presentation, worksheets, family education and outreach letters / text templates. And what's not included in that list is the financial aid glossary, which contains common terms and definitions so that parents or guardians who are supporting students can also become comfortable with financial aid language. We are actually in the process of updating them and we will communicate out to everybody. Sorry, let me just plug in my computer. Because a lot of things are changing, and with COVID, it's true we do need to update these. So we can go to the next slide. Then we have the college knowledge, which was developed in collaboration with several organizations. Like you can see, this resource provides information on how to support college-bound students scholarship who are in high school. There are 23 handouts that cover the most requested college readiness topics. These handouts are in 5 languages, English, Russian, Somali, Spanish, and Vietnamese. So this is a great resource to use to support students and families as they prepare for college. And I'll hand it off to Sarah, to Sarah, to Christina.
I would be happy to be confused with Sarah from my agency in a
I know.
heartbeat. I love Sarah so much. I'm like, confuse me any day with Sarah Weiss. Sarah Weiss is nice. So one of the things we do have access to help you see the financial application is the FAFSA demo site. This is a site where you can actually sign in as a student from either application year. You can be a student who's got a renewal, a new application with errors, independent, dependent status, everything's on there. What I like about it is it's a way to walk through the application yourself without having to complete one. I use it to pull the slides from this presentation today. I also do it usually a couple times before helping students, and I try to confuse it to see where my errors and pinch points might be. So it's a great tool for you to use. And anyone can use it. Any of the passwords that are on there, you're more than welcome to use. It doesn't save anything. It resets whenever you close it out. In the chat, I put a link on how to order resources. So you can order college knowledge books from us, postcards. We have our 12th year campaign workbooks, all of these things. Again, most frugal woman in Thurston County, we're not going to charge any money, of course. Everything's going to be free. I would never provide you with a resource that costs money. So you can order all of these items for free from us. We also have student support modules for topics like what is financial aid, how to sign your financial aid application. And these modules have a video, a resource, and typically some sort of quiz that they can take afterwards to assess their learning, or some sort of activity. We also have a financial aid advising day calendar that has all of these videos plugged into a calendar so you can see what a financial aid advising week would look like. And then data. What will we do without data? Like from Star Trek, or data for financial aid? Let's put it out there. So financial aid completion data is really important for us to be able to understand where we're at for completion and who we need to serve. So you can use our financial aid completion portal by just selecting the portal on our main page. And then we have data access, and that was the chart that we saw at the beginning that showed our financial aid completion rates. You have to have a data sharing agreement to see student-specific data. So anyone can see aggregate data. If you're colleges or CBOs, those who can't get student-specific data, you can still see broken down by school, by district, and by the whole state, year-by-year data in a Tableau, how financial aid completion rates have been. And then if you're at a school, then what you can do is you can actually access the student-specific information to see if a student's completed the application, completed with errors, is missing a signature, or if they are like, I totally know I completed this and it's showing unmatched, and you know that maybe they filled out the wrong year. And Jennifer, no worries, I'm going to put that link in. Oh, it looks like you already got it. Awesome. The link right there is for the FAFSA completion portal. Thank you, Jennifer. And then we have some upcoming trainings that, Dinda, were you going to talk about your upcoming trainings?
Yeah, so we're still planning on having the financial aid 201 after the application, giving ourselves and the students some time to actually put in some application, but then what happens after we have put in that application. And so we'll have a training on that sometime next year, late spring. So keep an eye out for that. And then if usually we share that information on the website or in our newsletter. So if you haven't signed up for that, please do that. Do you want me to continue to speak on DUER? Because you have one more training that's coming up, Christina, or do you want to take that on?
I can. So for the dual credit, you can talk about, if you want to talk about dual credit summit series, I can.
Oh, okay, yeah. So there's still one more coming up on November 18th. So I'll put a link here for more information. So I think the series started in September, and then the last one will be in November on the 18th.
And then I'm putting in the chat our Aim Higher training series, the website for our training series. We will have more listing of trainings on here. So if you're a 12th year site, 12th year and kind of Aim Higher, we're kind of teaming together to do our trainings so that we can do trainings for both. And so there'll be different types of trainings that come up later in the year that will cover more topics that are picked by you.
Just one last.
We don't have, oh, go ahead.
No, I just missed one question. Somebody asked me when we're going to have some of the resources that I shared, the Financial Aid Toolkit in the printed version. We need to regroup, our program needs to regroup, and I will have that information for you. Please reach out to me directly so that I can follow up with you.